Hello everyone again, and now we have came to the last session of the day, and it's going to be a special session because they always say the last one will be the best one, and that means that we will run this session with a few hiccups, meaning that Richard unfortunately has some technical issues. So we'll try to do our best to keep the panel going. I have been prepared in the last 20 seconds, so we're gonna go for it. And I would like to start this panel discussions, which will be around the future of AI. There has been a lot of discussions already today about AI, but I know this last session is going to be special because I know some of the people that are in the audience, and I know they have a particular view and they have some deep knowledge also about the industry. So if I may just start with a quick introduction of everyone, and let me start with Wan Sie. Can you please introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, I'm Wan Sie. I'm from Singapore. I'm actually working on trusted AI and data with the Infocom Media Development Authority. That's the IMDA. IMDA is a government agency who both develop as well as regulate the telecom, media and data sectors. So I'll be very happy today to talk about my work. Before I elaborate further, maybe I can pass over to Cocoon to introduce the other panelists.
Thank you. If maybe Michael can go first, go next, sorry.
Hi there. Pleasure to meet everybody. Thank you all for I guess, plugging in and listening to us. My name is Michael Blakey. I've been an early stage investor for the last 21 years. Started off in the UK running Avonmore developments, and then recently set up Cocoon Capital, which invests across Southeast Asia in enterprise and deep tech.
All right, well, welcome to the panel. Luke, if you could present yourself.
Yep. Hi, so I'm a founder of a AI venture builder. We build AI companies from the ground up. So we look for research in universities, and then we validate the opportunities with the business, and we then select teams, CEOs, CTOs for those companies. I'm chief scientist also in a company called Hazy, which specializes in synthetic data, private synthetic data for the financial services industry. So very interesting.
Interesting. Thanks to have you on the panel as well. Last but not least for now, let's hope that Richard can still join in, then I will disappear. But for now, last one to present yourself. Jaede, if you could present yourself also.
Sure, thanks, Ken. And thanks for joining everyone. My name is Jaede Tan. I am Managing Director of Asia Pacific for ComplyAdvantage. We are a RegTech company founded in the UK just over 7 years ago now. And we focus in the space of anti-money laundering compliance solutions. So that's around customer onboarding, transaction monitoring and transaction screening, all based around the technology machine learning based approach to creating data and also providing risk profiling.
All right, that sounds familiar for me at least, since we are a customer of yourself, so not making any promotion now, but since I'm also a customer, I'm also wondering what's actually on the development agenda. If you look at AI specific, what are the trends that you see going forward, and where are the eggs put in the basket for ComplyAdvantage?
Sure, I mean, I think maybe if we start at where we began, and then we can start to look at where we're going. I think just in general, external risk indicators are just becoming harder to spot, just as the amount of information grows exponentially and the speed of change just gathers pace. And so that's where 7 years ago, our founder Charlie really saw an opportunity in the market to do things better. And that's where we've employed machine learning, AI, specifically at this point in time around deep learning and natural language processing. And this is really to build risk databases of people and entities so that financial institutions can understand the risk of the people they're transacting and interacting with. So at the basic level, that's looking at structured data across sanction lists. But when you start to move across the spectrum, that's how we actually interpret adverse media articles on people and start to build profiles around individuals and companies. And that's really where we started. And the main benefit that we're really looking at, and the three axes to provide this are just around speed. So ability to provide up-to-date information of really rapidly changing risk profiles of customers and counterparts, just breadth of coverage. So we read through machines 200 million articles a month now, and process that information into essentially who's a baddie and who's a good guy. And then just accuracy, like removing any form of associated contextual human bias that exists in creating data sets. And when we move into the future, we think we can apply this, and we're looking to apply this much wider. So at the moment, we have a really robust database around sanctioned entities, PEPs, adverse individuals. But now we want to go up the chain, looking at corporate registries, looking at document scanning. What can we tell you? We want to build a neural network, and Charlie used to call this Skynet, but I think that kind of scared a few people. But it's really this idea of, what can you understand about every individual or company that you're interacting with, so that a company can really understand the risks associated with anyone that they're interacting with.
Interesting. What I was thinking immediately about was, Luke is a venture builder, and by the name I thought I recognize the name, but now I see we have obviously already met before. So I was wondering, in venture building at the moment, what is the latest trend there? Do you see something similar than what the story is from Jaede and ComplyAdvantage, or in the new startups we already in a complete new dimension, the fourth dimension?
I think for me, where I see the synergies, or I think in what we're saying, I really see that some of the latest models, which can really help deal with complicated structures in diverse data sets and things like this, they can really improve your ability to understand the world, But they have this problem of explainability and auditability. So as a venture builder, I think where we really see is that at the same time, a lot of these automated machine learning pipelines are evolving, but we really need to push on this kind of human interface, this ability to be able to understand and audit what these things, or at least allow regulators to be able to come in there and audit them. So I think it does push a lot of pressure on regulators to be able to actually, if you want to be able to take into a much broader account of whether to give a loan to someone or not, other data sets, you need models that can actually cope with this. And so I see this human AI explainability, human AI collaboration, not just beyond just data science, as being a real trend, and cross sector kind of collaboration sort of thing, which is where we see, obviously, from a Hazy synthetic data point of view, from a data privacy, we see big opportunities extending these technologies.
Interesting. And before I go to Wan Sie, as being working for a regulator, how do you see the role of the regulator look in this story? So there's a large important role there to get understanding and to get explainability, and it's something that we heard in many other discussions already today. Also, that collaboration part. So how would you see that going?
So I think it has to start with regulators being able to get access to data, and I think people are not going to give their regulators raw data. It holds too much sensitivities in it. But regulators, in the end, need to get access to data so that at least they can understand what is going on. And I think one of the biggest opportunities, in my view, particularly addressing the kind of bias sort of issue, or the unethical models that might, let's say you take a skin cancer detection app, if it's only ever been trained on white skin, your ability to detect skin cancers and you're then selling it to people as a good skin detection app, it's pretty unethical. So I see that's a perfect example where regulators should have access to a data set that becomes the gold standard that allows you to benchmark. And I see regulators as this ability to pull data across and to be able to work out best in class, work out meaningful benchmarks for AI models. But it probably creates a different workflow to how they currently relate to their businesses today. It means data pipelines have to evolve.
So can I conclude power to the regulator, Wan Sie?
Thanks, Com. Okay. Yeah, sure. I call myself less a regulator and more of a policy maker. And I think maybe we can talk a little bit about what are the policymakers thinking of. Then maybe I'll address a little bit about what Luke mentioned just now. What's the role of the regulator? So what are policymakers thinking of right now and in the future, right? Since we're on the panel for the future of AI, so what are the policymakers thinking of in the future? I mean, recently, I'm sure just in April, very, very recently, the EU has launched a draft AI regulation, right? And explained what they want to do. And that's big news for many regulators in this space, right? Because it sets a standard, it sets a tone as to what can be done or what EU is thinking of doing. Just like GDPR, it sets a certain standard, certain tone as to what they expect industry and companies to do. So we are all looking at that and also looking at what we want to do in response, right? Or actually in alignment. So in Singapore, actually, we are not planning to regulate. That's not something that we think we're ready to do at this point in time. Very much it is about industry sort of self-regulation, but with a lot of guidance from the government on what we want to do. So we put out a lot of material already around what would be the governance framework, how do you do self-assessment, and so on and so forth in your implementation. And actually, as a next step, and it's also looking at where a lot of other jurisdictions are starting to think about regulations, as a next step, I think everybody will be thinking about conformity assessments, certification, testing, and so on. So it's not just about how you implement governance, but how do you make sure that you implement it in the way that is required by your regulators, or at least required by your stakeholders, whether it's your board members, your customers, or other partners that you have, right? How are you implementing governance? And that's where I think it's really something that's coming up in the horizon: certification, testing, conformity assessments. And how do we go about doing that? Again, that's going to be pretty tough because, as Luke mentioned just now, right? It's an issue of access to data. It's an issue of being able to look at the model. So the EU has put out some ideas. Singapore is going to put out some ideas as well. And I think what's important is the ability for companies to, based on certain frameworks, be able to show, right, how the model has been trained, what kind of data has been used. Maybe you may not actually show the data, but you can show that you have gone through a certain process of training, of validating, of testing for bias. And even for something like testing for bias, as Luke mentioned, right, it's going to be quite different for different applications. What are the areas that the companies then say that they are not going to be biased against? Is it employment history? Is it education? Is it gender? Is it race? Is it religion? Is it educational? I mentioned that already. Is it income level and so on? So that depends to us very much on the application and on the regulations, or if without regulations on them, what the companies are prepared to stand up to, right? So we are actually looking at moving forward, thinking about these areas and how do we validate that. So that's one big space, I think, on the governance area that's coming up. Another big space, and what keeps policymakers actually awake at night, and I alluded to this as well, is how do we make sure that we are aligned globally? How do we make sure that whatever that we put out from a regulatory perspective, right, is interoperable? Because we do not want companies like ComplyTech and so on, and any other companies, right, the big tech, big companies or small startups, to have to jump through different hoops every time they operate in a different jurisdiction. And that means international cooperation. And that is also something that policymakers are worried about. How do we work with one another? How do we make sure that our different interests can be aligned, and how do we interoperate? So that's also another area that Singapore is very keen on. That's why we participate actively in international platforms like WEF, like the Global Partnership for AI, like the OECD. That's really on the governance part. And maybe, do we have time? And maybe I'll just briefly talk about beyond governance and regulatory issues. We also think about other policy areas around AI would be things like data, access to data. That's huge. Today, only big companies have access to this data, and how do we make sure that startups, SME are able to access data? Because then you need to be able to then develop the models, develop applications based on the data that they have. So we're also thinking about data access from data sharing perspective, or making data available. What are the regulatory tools that we can put in place, or governance tools that we can put in place to support that? Then, of course, talent and so on. But I won't jump into that. Maybe if we have time later, we can talk a little bit about that. Thanks.
Yeah, okay, that's nice. I hear things that I like a lot, because I see myself as a very human being. And I think in the first part of your resume, you were talking about the ethical part of AI, which is a very important one. And then interoperability also sounds familiar. We've been there, done that, but then on the investment side, so where transactions were way too expensive worldwide, and this is coming. Now, if I was in the shoes of Michael and I had a lot of money like he has, and he's investing in early stage, I would probably have no idea where to start. So how would you go about what is it? How would you look at it? Where do you see the opportunities for you as being an investor?
I think if I look at the future of AI, I think I'm looking at what I see as some of the roadblocks and the bottlenecks for the adoption of AI. I can't sit here and kind of say what the solutions will be. I guess as an investor, we're always looking for the problems and trying to find smart people who can come and tell us how to actually solve those problems. So if I focus a little bit on, I think, Southeast Asia, where I'm based now, I think the two main problems that I see is with AI, you need data. You need quality data. And that is one of the things that's lacking. Even if you look within the kind of fintech or financial industry, there's either a lot of the information that's being held by banks or other organizations. A lot of it is relatively corrupted. It is all being stored in different ways, what's being kept and not kept. And also in terms of data sharing, there's a lot of information there that, that can't be shared or shouldn't be shared. And everybody has different regulations in terms of what can be used and what can be shared. So the problem that you have, and I guess it's, once you kind of mentioned it earlier, until there's really a global agreement in terms of how we actually use the data and how we manage the data, and it's going to make it very difficult going forward. So for me as an investor, I'm looking at somebody who, people who can actually take what data is there and actually cleanse it in a way so that it isn't misused, which it can easily be done. I also look at where institutions are. So I've got a number of companies that work with the banking industry across the region. And the big problem that they are always facing is, it's fine, we can build the best tools in the world will actually solve banks' problems. But first off, banks have legacy systems and legacy processes, and they can't actually normally work with kind of a lot of the technology that has been brought to them. And the reality is, a lot of the people in the banks are, I would say, kind of like me, and technophobes, is that they're scared of change. And unless they are going to be forced by the regulators to actually make the change, they are going to actually do everything in their power not to change. So it is and banks will normally go, and JD, I think this is something that you probably, they will probably go with the larger organizations with a lesser technology than they will go for the startups, because they'll always feel that they will not get into trouble if something goes wrong. If they're, so kind of looking at, I'd love to know kind of like the Comply story in terms of how you actually got started. Like right now, you've got the brand, you've got the backing, but at the beginning, that must have been a really interesting journey actually to getting that initial traction, because you're working in a legacy industry that is frightened of change. So it's kind of, I'm looking for people who can actually overcome that. And one of the other things that the issues that you have with AI and banks is, if you, let's say, I think somebody mentioned earlier about getting a loan and getting rejected. I think that's absolutely, and AI is bringing a lot of data in to make that decision of maybe rejecting a loan to an individual. But banks can't just have a black box. They need to have an explanation and an understanding of why it's been rejected. And
I agree.
So,
yeah, I agree.
So where you run into the problem is, sometimes I think the technology that is being built is too advanced or doesn't have product market fit for their end customer. So quite often as an investor, I'm not looking for the most cutting edge technology. I'm more looking for those that can actually work with the customers that they're going to have to sell to sometimes kind of do the whole, what I call the Trojan horse attack of solving something very simple for them and then upselling them to get to where they actually need to to get to. Trying to go from A to Z in one jump is just never going to work. So it's the companies that can actually grow with the industry and actually take them ABC and take them through the steps. So for me, kind of just going back to it, because I know we're talking about the future. The future, I think, is the technology actually not outpacing the customer or the regulator, and then understanding that you've got to start off with the data and figuring out how to use it, where it is, and also in places like Southeast Asia. There's a huge amount of missing data. If we talk about, the unbanked or underbanked, that's 70% of the population, which basically means we have no or very little data on them. We also, you have a lot of freelancers now. So, which makes it even more difficult to actually know the people, get clean data and enough data on them. And the old, if coming from the UK, most people had a job and they had credit cards, they had debt, they had bank accounts. You could actually build up, and there's a lot that you could then do with that data. But when most of the population actually is dataless in many ways, it becomes much more difficult. And maybe with Hazy, like Luke, with what you're doing, I don't know how you overcome, I know you do kind of like build synthetic data sets. Like, how do you manage actually when there is so little data to actually even build a data set from? Because, so maybe I can now throw this back over to you, Luke, to kind of, because this for me is in the developing markets is very different than I think in terms of the more developed markets.
Interesting question, Mikael. I think, Luke, that's if you could take that one. I've got a couple of other questions also that are coming back in all your answers, but Luke, please go ahead.
Yeah, like the data is always, if you're going to do any artificial intelligence startup, like you almost have to start the business with, in my view, with knowing where the first data comes from in order to benchmark that you've got something of any value. And the biggest challenge for us with Hazy was building. We work closely with Nationwide. Luckily, they're an investor, so this allowed us to. This helped from the data side in the beginning, at least, to be able to understand that we were doing the right thing. But it is a huge challenge, and taking a startup mentality and working with a large enterprise with legacy systems, it is a totally different experience to, let's say, having a bunch of academics or a spin out from a university sort of thing who've never had to deal with this before. So I think, I don't know to what extent I am answering your question, but I think I do see that these interfaces having to be able to communicate in the right sort of way, having to nail down the data sets to get the right kind of proof points or demonstrators or whatever is super critical. And it's under kind of appreciated at how important that is, I think, with creating new businesses in a way. I don't know to what extent. Maybe I missed some of the points, Michael.
No, I mean, to be quite honest, it was an unfair question. But I think you've answered. I mean, yeah, I think you answered it well. Thanks you for that.
Okay, well, thank you for that as well. What's something that I basically jumped into this conversation, so I try to take your preparations, but it's hard. So if there's any topics that you want to discuss, then by all means just interrupt me. Otherwise, I'll come up with my questions, because I have the opportunity to speak to 4 specialists, which I don't get every day. So what I hear is, I hear, to come back on the ethical part, I think that also Michael mentioned it, where you say there's a lot of unserved, unbanked people around, so data is of importance. At the same time, I hear a story where the AI, the next step in AI, the future is where you will put boundaries against it. So I'm wondering, and it's an open question, it's not a judgmental thing, it's just, will it not block too much innovation and therefore not unlock the unbanked, or is this the right way to go forward, Wan Sie?
Yeah, actually, that's a good point. So one of the reasons why for us we are not so ready to regulate, at least not in Singapore, is because we think it will in some ways stifle innovation. Of course, the work that the EU has put out, it's actually very interesting because they actually specify only in very specific applications that you need, high risk applications that's going to impact safety of, let's say, the consumers that you need to go through a regulatory approach, right? So for us, yes, innovation is important, and if we in areas where we're not very sure, I think we always want to be able to allow the industry to lead the way to kind of figure out what needs to be done. In this case, in the area of, let's say, the unbanked, in the area of actually it is about unbanked, of lack of data, right? Then potentially they can look at alternatives. I mean, today there are many companies are looking at alternative ways in which they can provide loans to individuals that may not have a long banking history, right? Or even a lot of data. So are there alternative data sets that they can use? And these are areas that that's very new. We have to study what's the impact, right? Is it going to be fair? Is it going to be cause any downstream issues for the consumers and so on? So I think there is a good balance of making sure in areas where you're very comfortable and you're familiar that and actually there are already some regulatory boundaries set aside that you do want to have a bit more oversight on what the system is doing. Then in areas that are fairly new, let the industry do some work and then figure out when the regulator then needs to come in.
And something that also was on my mind the whole time when I was listening in is that rubbish in, rubbish out. In some of the other panel discussions, it also came across. It's very clear. If you don't have quality in the beginning, there's not going to be a good ending. So I think that probably is the mantra of Jaede and his company, because rubbish, if there would be rubbish at the beginning of what they do, then there is no trust, and they could never come to the place where they are today. So you're also in financial inclusion, Jaede. How do you look at that? How do you see your role as data gatherer and data proofer in terms of bringing the world to a better place and lead to financial inclusion?
Sure. I mean, the rubbish in, rubbish out is really interesting, because we spent a lot of time in the early days building the machine, but not necessarily investing in where to point it. And that's something that came with experience over time, is, okay, we can build fantastic algorithms, but if we're not actually pointing it in the right places, we're not going to get the right kind of outputs that we want. And so that was a learning process that we went through very early on. There's huge amounts of data out there, but we can't, as great as our algorithms and our technology is, we can't point it at everything and expect it to make sense. And so actually there needed to be an intensely human aspect in terms of actually where we point the data, and that came by design. And that's, over the last 7 years where we've been really able to fine tune our offering. And through that, we're really looking at how we can start to understand more and more about people, not just the ones that you can easily find if you were to put a name into Google, but actually, like you say, like the unbanked population, this huge population that's coming online, and like Michael and Wan Sie, we sit right in the apex of this, right? Like billions of people about to come online, have a bank account, have some form of credit for the first time ever. And that's where we sit. We really have to be looking at and firstly understanding the risks that come along with that, the kind of money laundering or activities or behaviors and typologies that might actually come as about of a completely new and emerging population, but also allowing a lot of that risk to be demystified moving forward as well.
It almost sounds like you guys need a supercomputer, or at least the industry needs a supercomputer, and that somehow hoovers me into a question that I saw in your preparations, that Luke also has a very good understanding of quantum computing. So would you see quantum computing as a next leap forward in AI, or how could you relate those two topics with each other?
Some of the base, actually, interestingly, if you think around how machine learning models are trying to learn how to distinguish between cats and dogs, some of the base concepts mathematically of how you distinguish between, or you look at the overlap between cats and dogs, is actually very similar mathematically to the idea of entanglement in quantum computing. But I actually feel that we're a little bit of a way before we see quantum computing making a tangible impact on like training AI models for banks. I think like even Google is saying we're not going to see when it's probably the end of probably 5 or 6 years away. And I think this is kind of my view. But I think what's important on the quantum side actually is a little bit more like preparing encryption, quantum secure encryption, pushing on this area, pushing on kind of quantum random number generators. So I think some of the other quantum technologies as probably having an impact before the computational power of quantum computing will have an impact actually.
Well, talking a little bit about computing power and probably people that are generally not so much within the boundaries, then I'm talking more about the cyber threat that we have. I mean, because of Corona, we see generally speaking or globally speaking that there is more activity on the black side of the world. And I'm talking about black hat type of hackers and stuff like that. They also have access to these kind of tools. So I'm wondering, how does a policymaker look at that? How can, sorry, Wan Sie, if it's too difficult, it's too far off for what you prepared, that also let me know. But as I said, I'm taking the moment just to get all my unanswered questions solved today. Or maybe somebody else has a view on this. Or more general, how does cybersecurity come along with AI? Because I mean, there is the ethical part and there's the unethical part, and there the bridge is very easily made. So how?
I should just say this because it's not my field expertise. That in the area of trustworthy AI, there is a space where people are starting to worry about the data, right? Can someone mess around with the data, and hence that actually impacts the model, right? And how do you then solve for that? Because it's not my field, I can't really get into that in too much detail. But that's something that many people are worried about.
I can understand that this is a concern, right? Because you can augment the data, and that can look like real data at the end of the day.
Yeah. You can change little parts, and it will throw the model off, for example. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
So
one of those. Yeah, cool. One of the things I was wondering as well in your introduction, Michael, you mentioned deep tech. I heard a lot of tech today. I heard wealth tech, I heard fintech, I heard soup tech, I heard RegTech, I heard all kinds of tech. But deep tech has not passed any of the panels I was in. So enlighten us. Why deep tech, and how does that relate to the future of AI?
Well, again, if you take like medtech, for example, we've got a company called C-Mode, and it looks at stroke prevention. So at the moment, hospitals are collecting all of this data, which they've just got sitting around, and to make a judgment on how to actually treat somebody who suffered a stroke is scary enough. It's pretty much guesswork. And where you're seeing a lot of traction now in kind of medtech is actually taking all the data that is there and actually coming up with informed decisions. And so where the deep tech is very much along the lines of collecting the data is out there and using it in a way that actually takes the guesswork out of how doctors actually make decisions. And I think for me, it's not always about building a new robot or having more surgeries. Sometimes it's just actually having more clarity in terms of what has actually happened to the patients. Using the data that's already been collected through scans and through blood tests, and actually giving the doctors what they need. And I think for me, that's why you're seeing the regulators getting much more interest in software solutions for a lot of medical problems.
Yeah, so which comes back to the earlier point where it's about sharing and sharing data sets with the regulator, and therefore getting a common understanding. Yeah, when you actually made the bridge to medtech, since many of us to which I speak have been vaccinated at least one time. So we all have 5G transmissions in our bodies nowadays. So what's the impact of 5G on what we do? I mean, it has definitely an impact on med tech, because now doctors can operate remotely. There has been these video footages where people do that. It's amazing. But in terms of AI, does that have an impact? Does that help because data transmission can be more easily between data sources, or how can I see that? Maybe Luke, what is your view?
Sorry. So the question is what? Sorry.
Yeah, so 5G is around now, so right. So there's much more functionalities that are capabilities that were never able before. So new technology, Internet of Things, all combined, new data sets. But how does that impact exactly AI? How does this support the future of AI, or not?
Yeah. So I think one thing that Michael mentioned on or around, I think, I think certifying, like, there's huge amounts of data being created, no? And in a way it needs to be certified because it could become fake. I think you need to almost certify it, potentially link it to a blockchain or watermark it or something like this. But I think it really is it's going to push the boundary. Not all data is equal either. So like, humans, in AI, you can think around a concept called linked to curiosity, which is working out what is important and what is not important in relation to training a model. So I don't know if I'm answering the question really well, but I see that this distributed AI, this ability to be able to run models with security, with privacy, across different locations and dealing with this crazy volumes of data that 5G supports and this interconnectivity. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of challenges here, and also obviously from a venture builder, not a lot of opportunity as well.
Yeah. I think one of the use cases you see a lot now is around smart cars. The driverless cars. The amount of data that is being collected, you would need pretty much a supercomputer actually in the cars to do it. So what a lot of people are thinking in terms of the use of 5G is that what can you run in the cloud? What can you do now? There's obviously connectivity issues. There's a lot of issues that go with that, but I think the stronger, the better the connections that we have and the more reliable they are, it's going to allow us to do more things within the cloud. And you have the you don't want to have the IoT devices just having everything run on them. So I think the 5G is going to be the next step in terms of how can we actually do most of the compute or that's required to actually go through the data within the cloud. And I think 5G is obviously the one step. And I think that how reliable it is, I'll leave that to Luke in terms of, I think he's more of an expert than me on this, but that is something that I think is the next thing to look at.
We have 2 farming companies where we've got cameras on the farm. The connectivity is terrible. So we actually have to run models on the edge and in the cloud to manage that, and it's a real challenge. So we actually created a new business called LGN after a piece of the brain that does sensor fusion. But the business is focused on sensor fusion across edge devices and the cloud to be able to make that stack easier to sort of manage. But yeah, it's thorny problems, but they are really opened up. The reason on the farm is that you need the latency. You can't deal with the latency of trying to connect to the internet, send it up to a model, but you still need to collect data in the cloud to learn across multiple farms. So it's a really interesting area, I think.
Yeah,
somehow.
Maybe
very
very briefly. I think what 5G enabled and what Michael and Luke said are absolutely correct, right? And you can start seeing the pattern, right? Actually, today a lot of the AI applications, the top users of AI is in financial services, in healthcare, and these are all about consumers and individuals, right? The data that we collect. But I think what 5G enables is really we're going to move a lot of AI applications towards IoT-based kind of data, which will be quite interesting, whether it's in a farm, on a vehicle, or in a factory. And
Smart cities.
Smart cities. That's the next bound. Yeah.
And I think just from a financial services point of view, where we see a lot of 5G and just digital connectivity in general, and this goes back to our, the unbanked population coming online, is everyone, does everything and interacts through their smartphone now, right? And that expectation of being able to open an account, download an app, open an account, has translated from ordering a taxi or food to opening a bank account, right? And that's where a lot of the need initially came for services like ours. Is like, how do I make a very, very quick decision on someone as to where their risk profiles actually lie and whether I can actually open a bank account for this person and transact with this person? Because if I don't hook them right now, they've got 5 or 6 other options that they can go to almost immediately. And that's the big business driver that's really driving a lot of the change that are needed, certainly from where we sit. Is like, how do we actually streamline that AML compliance process to actually understanding the risk of an individual immediately as they interact real time through their smartphone, and onboard a customer from a country that we've never interacted with before in a population where someone's never had a bank account or any formal record before. That's a lot of the challenge that we're looking to solve, but only through the use of machine learning and the processing of a lot of big data can we actually get anywhere close to being able to do that.
Yeah, the other day I was in another session and it was around RPA. It's maybe a strange bridge to make, but the point was that they said RPA is everywhere, and RPA can be assisted, so it's you as a human being that actually does trigger the action, or it can be unassisted. So it's something that just runs in the back. And I'm wondering if I take that model into AI, or since we're talking about the future of AI, how do you see AI being applicable? Would it be something more that is triggered by humans and you use it whenever you want it and you activate it? Or will it something that will be hovering above us and it will help us as a global community? Any views on that, someone?
I can go. I have a lot of practice with this argument because my wife and my father are both compliance officers. And so when I first took this job, I had to
surprise.
I had to be very.
It was written in the cloud, Jaede.
Exactly.
Growing up, I promised myself I would never get anywhere close to compliance, but this is fate, I guess. And I had to very clearly articulate to my wife and my father over many dinners that we weren't there to steal their job, right? And so ComplyAdvantage wasn't there to replace that, at least not today, that human element that's really needed.
They can get their retirement package first,
Exactly. And I guess if we do our job right, then, and they go out, they don't have a job any further, then we've done quite well, and that's okay. But I think the point here is that, and I kind of refer to it as this responsible use of AI piece. Is what should AI and where should AI be used within that chain, right? Ultimately, today where we stand, explaining to a regulator that a machine, a black box, is making fundamental decisions over the risk of the company is probably a step too far, right? Explaining to a regulator, to a user, that we are using complex algorithms and machine learning to process huge amounts of data to allow humans to more efficiently and effectively and quickly make decisions based on highly processed. I think we're at that point today. And so I think it's a real journey when we look at the kind of the use of AI and the future of where we're going. I don't think we're at that point where machines replace humans in the decision making just yet.
No real-time Terminator.
Not yet.
No Rise of the Machine.
No Skynet.
Anyone else? Anyone else has another view on that?
I think it really depends on the application, right? On the impact that it's going to have on the individuals. If it's not going to be high probability of harm, if it's not going to be severe harm that's going to impact someone, then potentially a machine can make some decisions, right? For example, when you're doing a chat, right, with a chatbot asking questions, you don't need a human intervention for that because it's been trained to answer some of these questions, right? Or making a recommendation on what you should see on Netflix or what you should buy on the e-commerce platform. I think those are also AI applications, those recommendation engines.
Sure.
And again, you don't really need a human to step in. But of course, as a human, I get to choose what I want, whether I want to take a recommendation or not. But in scenarios where that's going to impact someone severely, and it's not just in healthcare or in financial services, it could be in employment, it could be in education. In these areas, I think then yes, the AI is meant to augment the human decision making. It's meant to make it more productive for the individuals, but it shouldn't then be making those decisions. And then we have applications where human intervention is still required in any of these scenarios.
Yeah. I get asked quite often sometimes, am I frightened that AI is going to take over my job? And the reality is that I think there are no clear data points that will actually, you can give me as much data as you want and you can have something say to me, but the final decision is normally made based on no data. I'm investing, the stage that I'm at, and I'm investing in quite often. You've got a wonderful story, and you've got a couple of founders, and they've got lots of hopes and dreams, and they're looking me to fund to see if they can turn their world of fantasy into reality. And I just don't, even if you go to later stage, it is very, very difficult when you're dealing with venture-backed businesses to actually have enough clean data or clear data to actually make any decisions or even recommendations. And quite often, if I find that if you have, I think when you've got a level, so if you're in finance, if you're making a decision if somebody should get a loan or not, and you've got the data sets to actually prove it, it's easier to make that decision because it's more clear cut. It's more of a yes and no. You've got a clear decision. I think even when you're analyzing data, let's say for something like C mode, it never gives you that final 100%. This is what you've got to do. It gives you the kind of more accurate information for you to actually have that you wouldn't have been able to see in a way that helps an individual make a final decision. And I think for certain jobs, actually having more information actually sometimes clouds judgment. And sometimes you've just actually got to do more of a personal experience and judgment call based on knowledge that is not something that can actually be written down. And I think that's more kind of early stage investing, because otherwise a lot more people would do it and make a lot more money if it was kind of that easy to do. So,
but Michael, there's a little confession that Luke and I have to make. I mean, we have been talking behind the scenes, and we'll be building a new venture. It's the robo-investor. So who knows? Yeah. Guys, we're running in the last 10 minutes of our interesting discussion. And again, it was a bit of a hassle for me, at least, to take over the role of Richard. And I know Richard is extremely knowledgeable about AI, so I'm sure I missed some very important and thoughtful points. So maybe I'll just want to make a quick tour at any points that you believe that have to be said today. If this was the last panel that you could ever participate in, because the rest of your life you would go on holiday, but this was your time to speak to the world, what would you say about AI? I'm going to start with Jaede.
I think it's we really have to demystify and work as a community to demystify, remove that kind of fear factor and mystique that's associated with some of AI and machine learning. And to really showcase the benefits and create this understanding. Michael, you spoke about regulators earlier. I'm very lucky to be sat in Singapore, where we have very progressive regulators and policymakers. And in some of the other markets we work, it's not the same globally. And I think there's still a lot of perceived risk when it comes to AI. Are you just replacing one risk basically with another? There is a place for this. absolutely there's a place for this. And so I think it's in really important as a community to work together, and that's vendors, that's users, that's businesses, that's regulators, policymakers, to really work together to understand this, to make sure that it can be used responsibly, ethically, morally, and with a correct place in society and business.
Thank you very much. I think the MIS would massively agree with that statement. Wan Sie, what would be your final words if you would stand on front of the audience and this is your moment to shine?
I think the future, right? I mean, it wouldn't be that far in the future, but I think what we want to be able to do is to how do we as individuals, organizations, countries come together in terms of making data available for kind of AI for good kind of applications. You know, today is how do we bring that together? I think that's something that is feasible, it's entirely feasible. It's a function of getting together, identifying what are the use cases that we want to solve, and then addressing some of the jurisdictional or actually standards is a big problem, and access issues, and then really then using data to build AI for good. Yeah. Whether it's climate change, healthcare, raising the income level of communities, I think these are things that we can do together.
Yeah, well, nice words, and they resonate very well with how I think too. And frankly, they have been also passed in a lot of other panel discussions as well. And sometimes they were even referred to as, COVID obviously has been a horrible experience for the planet. I mean, a lot of people died, which is a horrible thing. My thoughts are for all of them, but at the other hand, it also triggered some new way of thinking. And yeah, one of those inputs that you got was, let's hope that this would be a reset for all of us, and that we kind of start with a blank slate and do it differently like we did before. So that's something I hear as well. Michael, you're on stage. You're not investing this time around, but you're the president of the robo-investor that Luke and I made into a unicorn.
All right. Look, I totally agree with what's been just said before me. I think the other thing, that the word that comes to mind is patience. I think AI is definitely going to be an important part of all of our futures and our children's futures, and it's going to become critical going forward. But sometimes there can be a huge level of frustration, is that industries don't move as quickly as the entrepreneurs or the technologists and early adopters would like. But I think with AI can be misused, and I think it's better to be cautious and take things one step at a time than try and actually rush and push everything out there. And I think right now we're only at the real beginning of what AI was going to be able to deliver for us and everybody else. So for me, this is a marathon and not a sprint, and we're kind of in the first part of it, which is why I'm still actually standing, because otherwise I don't think I could run a marathon right now. So for me, just be patient and just be aware that things will not move at the pace that we all would like it to. But I don't necessarily see that as a negative.
Mm-hmm. I see your point about running the marathon, and probably you want to run that in an agile fashion, which comes to venture building quite closely. Yeah. So look, your moment of fame is, the floor is yours.
No, I appreciate that. I suppose the thing, like we've seen some of the powers of some of the latest natural language processing models, you know? And we see like the sizes of these, and like AI is getting smart. AI is getting smarter, no? So I think one thing that I actually worry about is that I really worry about this interface between AI and humans. So I care a lot about explainability. I care about collaborative AI in a way that means that, in a way, we can understand a bit what is going on. So I think that we have to really push. Maybe this is more of an academic problem. We have to really push on this kind of human AI interface and explainability. Obviously, that naturally touches on kind of regulation as well, and auditability. It is hard to unpick these things now, because like humans, you and I can't know what's going on in the other person's head. We can have a chat about it. We can have a talk about it. We share a common language. I think the other thing I care a lot about is I care about data privacy, and I also care about people able to share data. Some of the local governments that we're working in the different departments, they don't share any data between the housing, between the social services, between the education sectors. There's huge, obviously in medtech, there's huge opportunity to collaborate, but this has to be done in a way that respects kind of privacy. And if we don't allow that, we end up meaning that the likes of Google and Facebook eat the world, because they're the only people that have access to data. And I think it doesn't democratize kind of startup creation. So I really think we have to be very careful around not meaning that those people just get more and more data and it becomes impossible for regional governments to create any startup ecosystem around AI. So yeah, and I think lastly, it is around regulators and being able to work with AI a bit, at least on their side, getting access to data again, being able to at least have some view on benchmarking. It doesn't have to be like we tell you what to do, something like this. Thank you.
Nice.
Sorry.
No, it's a nice summary. I was trying to break my head because we're almost at the end, and I was thinking like, what would be then the summary of all of it? And I think the summary is I'll try to give an attempt to summarize. I think we all agree that the opportunity of AI is large. It's huge. It's large also for humanity to be at a better place. But that also brings at the same time a whole ethical discussion about how to use it right. And that discussion, I think it became clear for me that it takes three to tango. It takes even more to tango. It takes also the policymaker, the regulator, the startups, the big companies, the big techs. It takes everyone to tango. It's not a song or it's not a dance you can do on your own. It's a collective dance. It's a line dance. It's definitely a symbiosis between human and machine, and it needs to be in front of humans. It needs to be there for humans. I heard Luke saying it is important that we can measure it. It needs to have a human interface. It needs to talk to us. So yeah, I think that's where I came for us as what I got out of this session today, and I was extremely proud to be your host. It was challenging, but at the same time, I would like to thank you all for your contribution, and I hope that you all agree that we survived at least this panel. We all missed Richard a lot. So the good thing is that we all know that he will come back next time, and we're going to go next level on AI. So that's going to be brilliant. But for now, I would like to give the word back to Mona. And thanks again, everyone in the panel. You've been great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Congratulations. Brilliant moderator. Well done.
Thanks.
Good job.